Next up are two of our founders pushing the envelope to enable mass adoption of the metaverse by providing the tools and infrastructure that enable creators to build everything, from fitness XR apps to mass-scale live events.
Virtual reality technology has unlocked entirely new ways to create and collaborate in 3D.
Shapes XR!
Shapes XR.
At Shapes XR, we've harnessed this opportunity and built a tool that gives creators superpowers.
A collaborative creation app on Quest to quickly explore different kinds of layouts and different designs together.
This is where VR just lets you do things that aren't even possible on a 2D screen.
Redpill's building a platform for the creation and distribution of social music experiences.
Wow, I love it.
This was more real than the actual real world.
One of those experiences that I think is going to change the game.
It could be a moment where you come to the end of your physical career, but my avatar lives on, and I like that idea.
It's kind of like mind-blowing to me. I think this is going to be the future for sure. It's so good.
Welcome to the stage, Inga Petrevska and Laurent Skelly.
So with that being said, one of the things we talked about in my initial talk was how with each cycle, the troughs are higher than the previously. How do you see the kind of developer activity, the kind of industry community that's actually building now versus 2 years ago when we were at the peak of the hype cycle?
Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, time flies. Particularly because with Shapes XR, you are empowering creators, designers to be able to build. So you have a pretty good insight into how many new products are being launched, how many new designs are being made.
So I probably start earlier from, when we started, that was 2016. And those days, the hardware was not there, right? And that's why the content was not there. And it was all a challenge just to build for this immersive tag. And that's why it was more powered by hype. And then, it was a decrease. And when I say sustainable right now, is that we have definitely lots of XR teams that are building not just games, but also productivity apps and fitness apps. And the good news is that the users' quality also increased dramatically. So they don't want to tolerate some really bad design, and they don't want to tolerate bad locomotion or motion sickness in VR. And this is great because users actually drive this demand for better quality apps. And Meta was reaching out to us 3 years ago, and they said, we need your tool on Quest because we don't have enough diversity of apps and we don't have good enough quality of apps. So, and I'm very glad to say that many titles that you see right now on store already start designing immersively. And this is just shows how the industry is maturing. As Anand mentioned, when we were designing internet, he was mentioning transition from PC to mobile, but the same initially we were designing internet, writing HTML code, right? And the internet was ugly. It was not beautiful at all. No one cared about UX, and Google, Amazon first websites were, oh my gosh, so unattractive and so easy to use, so complicated to use. But eventually now everyone can build a very beautiful website for the internet. So the same thing is finally happening for the metaverse. So we see that, teams understand that if they do design natively, they can build much better products. And our spatial internet or 3D internet is also becoming kind of really better quality. And and even though we don't have the design language, I do believe that we set the trends, we set the standards, how people get friction in XR and what has to be done to make really awesome experience. Because the most important thing is that when we wear the headset, we don't want to see web legacy, right? And web legacy, if you expect your user always look at front of him in flat screen. In VR or AR, we are allowed to look anywhere. And this is exactly the magic that has to happen. And that's why this is the change of the mindset for designers, for producers, for product owners, and everyone. So it's definitely maturing and much more sustainable than before.
And you just came back from Stanford, right, where you gave a talk to young designers. Is the college crowd interested in XR? Because I know AI is kind of stealing the show right now. What are they most interested in?
They were not just students. There were many different people, and it's not just about design, it's about aligning on your ideas. And it was interesting enough that in Stanford they even use VR to design like robot arms, and discover how this is going to work. So this is already being used for absolutely real world scenarios. And that was XR Conference, so definitely everyone was obsessed and addicted to XR, and that was, but the big trend is mixed reality for sure, and AR, and Qualcomm presented their AR glasses, and their actual idea is that we so get used to our phone that what if our input type is the iPhone itself? So we have the glasses, and then we use iPhone to actually manipulate games. We don't need controllers, we don't need hands, but we use because we so get used, to this touch panel type of interaction. So a lot of happening, and of course we are to some extent in a bubble, but Stanford even has a course, on XR for various kind of things. But I still think MIT is much ahead of them, but anyway, there is room to grow.
Over to you, Laurent. So you've been, running Red Pill for a few years, where you've talked to a lot of decision makers in the music industry that come to the office, they try it out. And how is the conversation, whether it's with live event producers, music executives, how has it kind of shifted, and how are they now slowly approaching VR, and what opportunity do they see in it?
Well, clearly during the pandemic, virtual events started to take off, right? And I think it's very clear that the future of live event is hybrid, because you can actually, from a business model, not just monetize something that happens physically, but you could extend globally to a worldwide audience on all devices, not just XR or VR, but every single devices with different level of immersion and interaction, but all live and social. So I think the industry is very cognizant of this is where it's going, and they're experimenting with what's available right now, which is these large gaming platforms like Roblox or Fortnite that have a very large user count, and but I've had basically make technical choices that are very specific to the original reason why these platforms have been created. So clearly you're seeing a shift in the perception of their desire to invest, their desire to experiment. So there's a incredible series of conversations for sure.
And in terms of early adopters, we saw Paul Oakenfold, in the trailer. You've recruited a bunch of different resident DJs. What's attracted them to make their own avatars, like Georgia and so forth? What kind of future do they see where their avatar, I guess, is an alternate version of them that performs separately, that scales them? What's the attraction that brings DJs to want to be in Red Pill?
Well, you mentioned Georgia. It's actually interesting because she has both her photoreal avatars, and she literally hired us to build a complete different avatar that doesn't look like her, and that's her IP. So she can actually drive and generate a completely new revenue stream with her performing her avatar or someone else. So I think there's these next generation artists that are really thinking about the future, and that they're experimenting and investing. And then Paul, clearly, this is a legend who introduced electronic music, and so very well known in the industry. So we really wanted to make sure that he was the ambassador talking about what the future is for the industry as a whole. So I think you've seen these individual artists experimenting, and you have, of course, these large operators that are seriously looking at what that means for their business model. And so we're in that very interesting phases of the right tools are not quite there for the industry, but there's some successful experimentation, and the future is wide open.
And when it comes to enterprise clients, I'm not going to say any names because I don't know if I can, so I'll leave that to you. But when enterprise clients come to you to use Shapes, what's their goal? What do they want to build within XR? Where do you see the first use cases where they take their existing brand companies to mixed reality?
So if you don't mind, Felix, let me introduce the company a little bit so that it's easier for people to follow what we are talking about. So Shapes XR, you can think about it as immersive Google Slides. So you all use presentations to tell stories, to pitch your ideas. So imagine this is the same, but you are inside the slide. So it's 3D immersive storytelling, collaboration, where you can meet with your team and build together your pitch deck or your design. So we actually target two major markets. One market is immediate one. The need is there, the pain is there. This is XR market. So all those VR, AR games, mixed reality applications. The second market is real world design. And real world, luckily, is not flat. We have distances, we have scale, we have depths. So there is no better way to design real world than doing this in VR, because it's not just 3D. Everything has the actual scale and size, right? So talking about enterprise client, they actually fit to either A category or number two. So I can make an example of consulting firms like Accenture, Deloitte, and all of them. So they use Shapes as a pre-sales tool. Actually, they use it as a pitching tool. They pitch to their end clients in Shape. They bring them in Shapes to talk about various ideas. Some of them are like, VR training for healthcare, like how to teach the surgeons, to use some tool. But you still want first to explain it before you invest dollars in development. Another category of clients would be companies like Logitech who are designing real-world things. And real-world can be like the conference, like a huge one where you have different booths for different companies, or that could be Volvo that wants to bring the model of the car in and play with the interior inside the car and then bring the users and run user tests. What will happen if we change interior a little bit, if we move the buttons, And it's something that is only possible in VR. So you can't do that in elsewhere, basically. Or you actually have the real car, and then you manufacture, invest all these millions of dollars, bring real people, like we need men, 50-year-old who come to check, if they comfortable with this new interior, right? So, and then to arrange this type of user test, it will indeed cost you tens of millions of dollars. But in VR, so this target audience can be immersed in the car, and then you run all this kind of user tests. So it's a huge time and money saving. It can be scaled like to any geography. Anyone who has a headset can become part of the user test. So this is how Shapes is being used. And lots of companies right now, you showed all those cycles, right? Company exists for 30 years and then they're gone. So luckily there are some great companies, they don't want to disappear in 10 years from now. So they invest in this innovation. But the good news, many of those units are not experimental anymore. So they do real stuff and real work in VR today. And like Siemens is doing like gas turbines AR maintenance training. How can you do this? So you come to Shapes, you import the model of those gas turbine, and then you build the layer of like this augmented instructions how the engineer is gonna maintaining this turbine. So, and then you run this and you bring people in. So there is a lot happening, and that's why I'm saying this is sustainable, because I don't know any company from Fortune 500 that at least like doesn't think in that direction. Most of them have now the metaverse departments or XR departments, chief of XR or the metaverse. Some of them are more advanced, some of them are not that advanced. So that's the case. And the final category of our users that are actually paying today are those designers working for the hardware, like Meta, ByteDance, and Qualcomm working on glasses, and Google, because they actually develop the device, but they still need to run software on that. So all the design and developers teams.
And how do you both of you monetize your platforms? Since we've seen a lot of startups, and specifically infrastructure, some of it fails to capture value, but both of you have, I think, very straightforward paths where it's reminiscent of what already exists.
First, I think that the point of friction, I just wanted to address that because this is so important. I mean, you're removing friction in content creation. And there's so much friction in our field, and it's so important to be able to remove that everywhere we can. And that's one of the reasons we've built a platform specifically focused for our use case, live performances, right? From creation to distribution to monetization to cloud rendering, so that a creative can just create art content. And there's 7 million Unreal Engine content developers platform is built on Unreal, and suddenly you have a fully operational, monetizable, beautiful virtual venue. That removal of the friction is so vital for this industry to finally take off, because you could add value to various stakeholders. In our case, the way we monetize is by simply taking a percentage of the revenue that flows through the platform, and but by adding capabilities that power the entire category. And so there's all kinds of monetization strategy. In our case, virtual tickets, digital goods, or any transaction that would happen, we take a commission for powering the category.
So in our case, we're building industry standard, and this actually forces us to have the fully available free version. And industry standard means that, first of all, we believe that every pitch has to be an experience when it makes sense. If you pitch anything that is not flat, like you pitch how your new, I don't know, hair dryer is gonna work, or you pitch how like the glasses are gonna look like, I don't know, like sunglasses, you have to do that immersively, and this will happen eventually. But building industry standard, we want to have this market share and kind of accessibility to our tool, and that's why Shapes is available for free on Meta Quest Store, and anyone can start creating. But revenue monetization-wise, we are a traditional SaaS software company. So we license seed to editors, to enterprises, plus platform fees. So this is like, if you know Figma, what Figma did for web design. So we do the same for 3D and immersive. So this is very, very similar business model. So free for anyone, individual creators, and then paid version and seed-based annual subscription for enterprises.
Awesome. Very, very straightforward. And I mean, that the great thing is, both already have a path to, you're already making revenue, even at this stage. When it comes, let's talk a little bit about the tech. Laurent, explain to me like I'm 5. I know you're very technical. You're one of the smartest technical guys, I think, in the entire room. And so a lot of people ask the question when it comes to VR, hey, I put it on for 5 minutes, for 20 minutes, I'm getting dizzy. Why is that, and how can you design your experiences better? Because we had a conversation about this when I tried Red Pill. How are you making design choices that reduce that or remove it?
Well, first, what really drew me to VR a long time ago now is the fact that this is really the first technology that is compatible with human biology. So the promise of VR is really to interact in a world the same way we interact in our current lives. And so I think the VR industry has made huge progress in creating presence and comfort. But that comes with rules, technical rules. And you could decide to violate these rules because of design, or you could violate these rules because of bad engineering. So if you have 90 frames a second, low motion to photon, motion that's one-to-one from your physical motion to your virtual locomotion, you will not get sick. That's been cracked, right? But then if you start to violate a tiny bit some of these rules, because you've got a low frame rate or because you have some latency, and that's not part of the design, you could have motion sickness. But you could also have it based on doing certain things that are not perfectly aligned with the law of presence. And, in some cases, even in Red Pill, we allow that. And then there's a degree of comfort that you build by just getting comfortable and using, and different individuals will have different level of sensitivity. So, you're climbing a tree in Red Pill, but you're not really climbing physically, right? There's a disconnect between your physical motion and your virtual motion. That's a slight violation. You teleport from here to here and you're physically moving around, there is zero violation, right? So certain things are going to be absolutely perfect as long as the technology can power that, and you get the proper latency and the proper frame rate, and that's 100% comfort. And then certain activities are going to be kind of individual specifics, where you've got certain individuals that will have more sensitivity than others, and there's certain things you could never do, right? If you do a virtual rotation while you're looking straight, that will get you sick instantly, guaranteed. So I think that there are both technical and design elements. Some of them that you voluntarily decide to slightly violate. So, for example, when we have the zero gravity dance floor, it's very soft. Like, yes, you can fly around, but it's very soft, right? You have this.
You don't just plummet to the floor.
Exactly. Yeah. So so there's a degree of okay, I'm gonna violate one of the law. Okay, let's be careful with that, right? So I think there's that's the range.
And when you first started, you mentioned the big win was cloud rendering. Maybe break down exactly what kind of challenge does it solve, and why did you make the technical choices to, you to take two different approaches, right? With Shapes, it's standalone, Unity. You chose PCVR, which means you need a heavy gaming computer, plugged in, tethered, and that limits the TAM, but this is a solution. Maybe you can explain how that solves it.
Different focus. So there's tremendous value in having standalone VR for many use cases. Red Pill's focused on live event, and live event by definition is a spectacle, and by definition a spectacle is beautiful visuals, live content, great sound, lots of users, rich environment. All of that costs compute that are far in excess of what's available on a standalone device. So our choices have been, let's build what we want to expect for these live events. And that means PCVR, that means a level of CPU and GPU compute that's far in excess of what you have on a standalone device. And the only way you're going to make that available at scale is by rendering this in the cloud. And so cloud rendering for video game has been in discussion and in design for a long time. As a matter of fact, when I introduced Brendan and Palmer to start Oculus, Brendan was selling Gakkai to Sony. But you look the last 2 years, GeForce Now went from 1 million registered users to, I think, 25 million. So it's finally getting to a place where the infrastructure, the latency and the bandwidth to the end user is in place to deliver quality cloud rendering. And from an enterprise standpoint, cloud rendering for VR is a thing. But typical enterprise use case, and you know that very well, there is not a whole lot of challenges from a compression standpoint. You've got a car or engine parts, and it's not 1,000 lights and lasers and hundreds of people inside an environment. So when you do this on the cloud, there are new challenges that comes from a compression artifact standpoint. So even though cloud rendering is
test.
Thanks. So my point is, doesn't like me? Oh, here it is. Okay. All right, guys. So the thinking is, it's good. It's good? You can hear me? Okay. All right, good. It's basically solving the last mile of delivering VR cloud rendering at scale is finally, I think, ready for VR to take a completely next step into delivering high quality experiences to people who are not gamers, who have not invested in $4,000 gaming rigs, but who want to go to an event and who really want to go to something that is a kind Ready Player One. So for certain categories, live event being one of them, I think cloud rendering is absolutely vital. And that's the reason why we build thinking that infrastructure, that framework, and the technologies to deliver the kind of content that we're building on the cloud would be available. Ended up, we had to have a hand in it, in building it. So I think the combination of standalone devices with cloud rendering will open brand new categories. We are just one of them.
I mean, even though we started on PCVR, right, initially, and that was a completely different product, and even though it was the computational power of the gaming-grade PC with video card of 1080, it was still not enough, to be honest, for all the lights and shadows that you want to have. Now we have a different product. We run on standalone Quest. It's collaborative. It's actually real-time co-creation in 3D. Like 20 people can come and in real time, and by the way, there is lots of R&D challenges there, to have this real-time synchronization, voice over IP happening. But as you said, for enterprise clients like Volvo, we want to bring our model in of 300 megabytes. And you say, sorry, but we only can allow you to do it with 50 megabytes, just because otherwise the frame rate goes down. And I definitely want to add some lights and shadows in shapes, because even in design, sometimes you want to go to high fidelity prototypes. Even though I keep pitching that staying low fidelity is a huge advantage, because like whenever you put an effort and it's all look final, you start designing. You basically start implementing, right? To keep ideation, brainstorming process, it's a huge advantage to say gray boxing, and really low resolution. But I'm also dreaming about these days when we can bring huge models, high polygons, and then when we can have lights, different sources of lights, and all other things that we can't afford right now because of the current generation of headsets. But something that is promising to come to the market seems to have better GPU 2-3 times. I don't know. So we are super excited. It will still not allow us to do everything we want, but at least something. And definitely cloud rendering is something that is highly awaited.
Which one has the highest?
But we can't tolerate any latency. We can't tolerate any delay. So that's why, every test I did with Verizon, even milliseconds, this brings so much friction. So we just can't tolerate that.
Well, there's two types of latency for cloud rendering, right? There is the actual motion to photon, which talks about the comfort, right? This you cannot compromise. And so when you do cloud rendering, you're doing essentially a reprojection after the image got to your headset based on your local tracking. So the motion to photon is instant, right? It's super, super comfortable. Now, the interaction latency is a different thing, because if you move your hand and it's going to take 50 milliseconds to go back and forth, right? That's an interaction.
The cube, but I don't see it.
That's right. And that's right. And that's why the cloud rendering will go through a couple of stages. The first one, everything is cloud rendered. The second will be hybrid, where your hands and your local interaction, will basically be locally rendered, and then the environment will be cloud rendered, right? So there is a whole journey for cloud rendering itself as well. But I think there is based on the requirements. In our case, it's a whole spectacle. The entire world, as long as perfectly synchronized audio and video, you're seeing something spectacular, and you have no motion sickness because it's locally reprojected. But if a first-person shooter that has super low latency requirement from the interaction standpoint will have different rules, right? And that will be more challenging because the interaction will be taxed with the latency of the round trip. So I think there are certain cases where it's more. It makes a lot more sense than others, both from a cost monetization and a user interface latency standpoint.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think we're almost at lunchtime, but what that means is two things actually. One, lunch. Two, we got demo stations, which means anybody, maybe let them get a bite first, can try.
And I did try red pill, so don't climb trees. You will get motion. Then I did came to their office in LA. Actually, it's an incredible dancing experience, so cool, and it's really like you see it's PC-based VR. Like it's very beautiful, but don't climb the trees.
I love the trees. It's one of my favorite things. Yeah. And then you throw yourself up and you float through the air. So during the break, we're going to make about an hour break. Go dance in red pill. Go build something, experiment in shapes. And we also got Neurable, which we'll present after the break in maybe 2 hours or so, where you can move things in VR with just your thoughts. So that's going to be really exciting. We're going to be back after the break. We're going to start a panel with Pearly and Aaron, where we have one more talk about VR. And after that, we'll rotate over into gaming for about an hour and a half with all our best gaming founders, from Web3 gaming to VR gaming. So stick around. Thank you so much.